For my inaugural shakedown multi-day kayak camping trip of the 2026 season, testing myself and my gear, I chose to launch from my former stomping ground of Thetis Island in the southern Gulf Islands of BC, taking the ferry from the town of Chemainus. As I prefer, the tidal cycle was mid-moon, in other words moderate, with neither extreme highs or extreme lows, and the forecast weather pattern was mixed, which usually bodes well for good paddling without excessive punishing wind or heat. Arriving on Thetis Island, I drove across the island to Sunrise Beach on the eastern shore. My launch was timed to catch a morning high tide since, as is common even during a mid-moon period, access to the water at low tide requires a long trudge across the intertidal flats. A gray, overcast sky in mid-morning during my loading and launch soon gave way to blue as I made the easy, windless crossing to Reed Island, just a couple of kilometers east of Thetis. Rounding the north end of Reed, I headed across to Porlier Pass, one of the main east-west navigation passages and well known for serious tidal currents.
Heading toward Porlier Pass between Valdes Island and Galiano Island, hoping for
Despite the calm waters, this leg of my day's journey took a bit more effort than I'd counted on, as I was transiting against the ebbing tide exiting westward through the pass. By late morning, when I finally reached the northern shore of Galiano Island, the ebb was in full swing. I used the shoreline counterflow eddies found in the lee of headlands to work upstream along that Galiano shore, easily getting past the old navigation light at the first major promontory. Nearing the most prominent headland, where the newer navigation light is located, I could see and hear the current racing past the point, and I knew this was a serious obstacle. day-paddling kayaker ahead of me, thwarted by the strong current, had hauled his boat onto the rocky promontory to better study the water. I followed the counterflow as far as was safe to get a closer look. The ebbing current, flowing westward, hits the long stone promontory and turns north with gusto into the main channel. But on the lee side, there is a strong countercurrent. In lighter flow conditions, it's fairly easy to cross from the counterflow and turn into the main flow along the upstream side of the rock. But in a full throttle ebb, attempting a sharp turn could leave one paddling hard but making no progress, or twist the kayak to the left and into the main channel, or worst case, capsize.
Yeah, I know. I think I just go back to a beach there and hang out for an hour or two. I think at 2 o'clock it goes slack, I think.
Yeah.
You just out for the day?
Yeah, I just came around.
The current was still flowing fairly fast at this time, but an hour earlier it would not have been passable. Once through the ebbing tide of Porlier Pass, I was going to land at the main beach at Dionisio Point, but noted that there were many walk-in folks enjoying the beach and rocks that day. I chose instead to head around the point and take a short break at the more sheltered and quiet lagoon on the eastern side of the point. Unfortunately, the tide level didn't let me get into the lagoon, so I just paused briefly on a reef, had a snack, and then carried on. After a 10-kilometer flat water paddle south, I was delighted when in late afternoon I finally reached my destination, Pebble Beach. I had never been here before, and while this would not be a good destination in northerly wind conditions, on this day it was perfect. It was quiet and unoccupied. With the mid-moon moderate tides, there was a good upper beach margin for my camp, and it was tucked below a huge ancient Douglas fir. And with the late day low tide and calm conditions, it was a good situation to try out my new toy, a Neo 2 drone. Day 2, paddling the northeastern coastline of Galiano Island. Weather is perfect, a bit of a southerly breeze, a bit of hazy overcast, which protects me from the sun a bit, so should be good. My 10-kilometer return trip north along Galiano Island was assisted by a light southeast breeze. I reached Dionisio Point around 11 that morning. This time the tide was full enough to allow me to enter the lagoon, and there I had a snack and donned my wetsuit in preparation for crossing Porlier Pass. Exposed to the winds of the open Salish Sea, also known as George's Strait, the eastern end of Porlier can be a mess of standing waves and churning waters. Before getting to the crossing, I had weighed my options if it had been rough, but the southeast wind had remained fairly tame. From Dionisio Point, I made a route that curved away to the east from the pass in order to avoid being drawn into it by the ebbing, i.e. west-flowing tidal current. This route, in the light wind and wave conditions, worked perfectly, and my curve took me to the outside of the Bell Chain Islands. A couple of kilometers ahead, along the east shore of Valdes, I headed into the southerly beach at Shaw Point to have lunch. During lunch, I noted that the wind and waves were rising steadily outside the sheltering reef. Indeed, there was a strong wind warning for mid-afternoon. I chose to leave my wetsuit on, but due to its warmth, I left it peeled down to my waist, feeling that if the wind picked up too much, I could put into a cove and fully don it again. The paddle ahead was about 10 kilometers to my destination. About halfway along, the waves were starting to whitecap. With less than an hour of paddling left, I chose to carry on. About 3 kilometers from my destination, the wind waves were fully whitecapping and averaged about a meter, with some about 1.5 meters. The 360 camera, standing 4 feet above the deck and shooting an extreme wide angle, gives a calmer illusion. With good fortune, when I reached my destination, there was a gravel cove sheltered by a reef from the surf, and I landed about 2 p.m. to make camp. The wind and waves increased right after I landed, but died down again after dinner time. This wild section of the Valdes Island east coast is Liaxin First Nation land, and I have been visiting here respectfully for almost 40 years. I am careful to leave no trace. I also note that the entirety of this shoreline can be quite hostile in northerly and in southerly winds, with few places to take shelter. The afternoon winds died completely after dinner, and it was a calm evening.
Okay, we're making pasta with fresh red pepper and some dried ham and some sun-dried tomatoes, all in one little pot. A bit of fat in the pot. You don't knock the pot off the stove. In goes
Some
the
viewers
garlic.
have commented that they wanted to see some of my camp cooking. Since I started going solo on my trips,
A little bit.
I've stopped catching fish since most of them are too large for one person, and I more or less rely on modified backpacking foods to save space.
Now the red pepper. 2 cups of water. Adding dried ham into the mix. We'll rehydrate. Add some dried tomatoes. Homemade dried tomatoes. Now to add in the main dish, Nora's marinara. Simmering for 8 or 9 minutes. That's dinner ready. Add a little cheese powder. Pour a little wine. Day 4. Perfect water conditions, even though the forecast cloudy skies, we have blue skies.
My first goal was to venture out to the nearby offshore reef where there was a sizable colony of stellar sea lions. Tour boats bring many people past here daily, so I'd aim to see the colony more at rest than agitated by nearby motor vessels. I first paddled out to sea downwind of the reef, then circled back on the far side of the reef. The sea was too choppy by this point for my non-stabilized video camera, so I cautiously and quietly landed, and with extreme telephoto was able to capture some clips. My second goal for the day was to land and enjoy Saturnini Island, a tiny islet in the Flat Top group near Gabriola Island. After an hour at Santorini, I headed out to Drumbeg Park on Gabriola Island for a lunchtime rendezvous with my friend Rick.
Captured on the 360. That was on the ground.
After leaving Drumbeg Park on Gabriola, I had a gentle passage through Gabriola Pass. Currents in this pass can rip and whirl, but on this occasion the ebbing tide was only about 3 knots. My final paddling goal for the day, apart from my destination, was to fully appreciate the impressive cliffs and erosion details along the northwest coast of Valdes Island as I paddled slowly southwards. mid-afternoon, I could see rain clouds forming along the mountains to my west. I finished my tour of the cliffs and paddled the remaining 5 to 6 kilometers to Blackberry Point Beach, which is about halfway along Valdes. Rain found me just before I landed, but I was able to get my rain fly up ahead of a major deluge. Fortunately, the heavy rainfall only lasted a half hour, after which the sun came out and dried everything quickly, leaving me with a beautiful, tranquil evening. If you're wondering, I take beach wheels along with me. These are non-pneumatic beach wheels, so that I don't have to completely empty the kayak. It's filled with all kinds of miscellaneous things, and I can usually just haul it up the beach on the wheels. It makes for an easier launch the next day. Another pasta night, thanks to the fine folks at Knorr, plus some additives. Red pepper, garlic, dried veggies, dried chicken, cheese. And there it is. 3 cheese pasta, plus, and a glass of wine while we look at the sunset. As I enjoyed my dinner and wine, this goose family decided to investigate, came quite close to where I was reclined. Seemed to be parading their chicks. Very proud of their 6. On day 5, the sea was calm at 6 when I got out of my tent, but by 8, when I was almost ready to leave, a northwest wind was starting to blow. My route was over to Thetis Island, with a short stop at Ragged Island, an old favorite, and then south along the eastern shore of Thetis. I stopped there to visit friends along the way, and then reached my launch point by 11:30. This was a great trip, the perfect spring shakedown paddle with lots learned about my gear and needed repairs and revisions prior to longer trips. Happily, I learned that my nearly 74-year-old body still was quite capable.